Today I'm going to be talking to you about a very interesting topic I hope you like. Um, Before that, I'll just say a few words about the company that I work for. It's called Merrick and Company. I don't think it's very well known in Italy. It's an architectural design and engineering company. We specialize in building laboratories, especially high containment labs, BSL 3 and 4. And I am in the scientist branch with them. So I advise with validation studies and creating SOPs, protocols, training, etc. So today we're going to talk about a new type of AI that's evolved since last year, and it's called embodied AI agents. I will explain a few slides what that means. And I will explain how we can use this in laboratories. Now, a few days ago, some of your colleagues were at a conference in Siena, which is the Italian biosafety conference. I gave a very similar presentation there. In that presentation, I made the case for why these agents should be used in high containment labs. Today, I'm making a further case for why they should be used in every lab, not just high containment labs. So I hope that by the end of the presentation, you can give it some thought to the idea of how these agents can be helpful to you in carrying out your research and in making the lab safer. So first, we'll talk about what are embodied AI agents. Then I will hopefully make a case that will convince you for why we should maybe consider using them. And then, of course, there are some limitations to the technology. For those of you that are not familiar, I just want to briefly also define artificial intelligence. This is my definition of artificial intelligence. It's basically the simulation of human intelligence using machines, computers that are programmed to think and mimic human actions. Now, an embodied AI agent, it's a new type of AI that is able to think on its own. And in order to be embodied, it needs to be occupying a space or a body. It could be a body in the human shape, or it could be a body in a different shape. I will show you some examples in a few slides, but it cannot just simply live inside the computer. And then ideally, these embodied AI agents should resemble human form and be able to replicate human movements, such as walking, pipetting, grabbing things, especially in the lab. And they are able to operate autonomously or semi-autonomously in laboratories. So these robots are already come equipped with many sensors. They have visual sensors, tactile sensors, thermal sensors, so they can gather and collect a bunch of data and then synthesize it together, give us trends, such as for example, the lab temperature, the lab humidity, things like this. They also will be able to navigate very complex environments. In the lab, we all know that sometimes the spaces are tight. Sometimes things change. There's a box that showed up in the hallway one day because some equipment came, and the robot needs to be able to navigate those spaces. And also it needs to not be able to crash into people. And then basically these humanoid robots combined with AI is what I define as an embodied AI agent. Actually, this is not my definition. This is a definition that I took from the AI world. So somebody already coined this name. How do they work? Here's a little brief diagram. So basically, the robot or the AI agent needs to be able to perform actions in an environment and then collect feedback and learns from it. So it needs to have a body. It needs to have memory, planning, and certain tools. It needs to be able to occupy an environment. And from that environment, it will have audio instructions, movement data, visual data, and then it's continuously learning. The closest thing to it that I can imagine as a simple experiment or example is when we have a young human baby and they're learning how to walk, how to talk, how to grab a fork to eat. There are already companies that produce embodied AI agent. Boston Dynamics is one of the most popular ones. They have a dog-like robot that you may have seen on TV that's able to climb hills and things like that. So in order for an embodied AI agent to be able to function, there needs to be four key components. The first one is that it needs to be grounded in the cognition of the physical world. So it needs to be able to interact with the physical world to be able to develop higher levels of intelligence, and be able to navigate space, interact, and manipulate objects. And also it needs to learn basically cause and effect. Just like we all learn when we are little, let's say if you're walking and then you bump into a wall, or if you walk down a step and you miss a step and you fall down, they learn the same way. Then they need to be able to have dynamic interaction. So our human intelligence is not just static. We don't just read from a book, memorize the information, and it stays there. We usually, as scientists especially, we go to the lab, we do experiments, we make mistakes, we learn from these experiments and these mistakes. So it's continuous interaction with the environment that helps us learn more and develop higher levels of intelligence. And so the same thing for an embodied AI agent. They need to follow feedback loops between perception, action, and cognition. They have to have something called situated cognition. So basically, it's context dependent. We all know this. Our behaviors and actions might be different in one country versus another. You might behave differently if you're hiking in the forest versus if you're walking in the city. Maybe in the forest, you might be watching out for wild animals. In the city, you might be watching out for cars so you don't get hit. So it's through this embodiment that you learn your context through limitations, needs, sensory inputs. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it rainy? Is it cloudy? Is it snowing? And these are forms of learning that cannot be achieved if you're an AI inside of a computer, or called disembodied computation. And the last is developmental learning. So again, this is like a small child that's learning new things in the world. It's a process of trial and error, exploration, and adaptation to the environment. And this influences how humans and animals develop skills. This is how we learn to walk, how we learn to talk, and eventually learn to solve problems. It's the same thing for this higher level of intelligence. So you can't just rely on pre-programmed knowledge. That will only take us to a certain level and not go beyond that. And as Felix said, please feel free to interrupt at any time or ask me questions. I don't mind it at all. So now I would like to show you an example, because I believe a video will be way more impactful than can we raise the volume? There we go.
From industrial automation to autonomous EVs, from delivery drones to increasingly advanced robotic humanoids and pets. AI is on board. With their sensors, motors, and natural language processing, now they're interacting with us and the rest of the physical world. Right? It's much more lifelike having chips in this. China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology says China since last year has been 100 embodied AI and robotic products, claiming the country holds 70% global market, largely to its unrivaled STEM disturbing supply chain of critical parts and advancements in its own AI and chips. The embodiment will of China's deep sea moment. I think that question for the whole culture where we're trying many Gen AI research We have also labs that use these or work on these things. Whether with this hybrid, we might develop one or have a real impact. I think that's the question. We do know that the central government has put out a venture fund capping about 138 billion.
I'm gonna skip over this a little bit.
Of humanoid robots or job market in China. Online recruitment firm Galpin says the number of job openings in China's humanoid robotics sector has quadrupled so far this year from last, with salaries for the leading algorithm engineers rising well past the average minimum pay.
You can see the robot is breakdancing.
Consumer robotics in China
Doing Tai Chi.
So-called humanoid agent AI avatar, 4'2" 77-pound G1, the web for $16,000. You can do all kinds of things. You can run, you can jump, you can get your coffee, or for $1,600, there's the 4D ultra wide recognition LiDAR equipped go-to dog with plenty of tricks up its 12 flexible rejoin motors. For Chinese vast industrial complex as well. Rapid automation includes the increasing use of inspection and diagnostic bots with embodied AI, such as Lenovo's six-legged Daystar, deployed to places unreachable by or unsafe for humans. I think the Chinese robots will come into the world, in a way that kind of impress the money, impress value, that will be kind of usable with the backing of state policy and funds.
I'm gonna stop it here. So as you can see, maybe when I was talking to you, you might be thinking this is science fiction of the future, but it is not. The future is here now. There are already many robots that can do many functions that could be helpful to us in the lab. So I am making the case that these robots that are embodied AI agents could be very useful in different laboratory settings. These are some examples. They can be in a regular laboratory or in a high containment laboratory where the robots can perform some experiments for us or different other functions with consistency and reliability and reproducibility in ways that humans cannot. Just because we're humans and we sometimes make mistakes and make errors. They can also improve biosafety and biosecurity in the lab in different ways. These agents can also be used in temporary emergency response laboratories, where sometimes these labs need to be put together rapidly, or you have to implement robust safety measures, or the labs are just really in a very remote location where it might be difficult to get a human being there quickly or at all, depending on the situation. They can be used in just permanent field laboratories, where they can help support critical lab operations in environments that may be inhospitable to humans or very difficult to be. So, for example, you can imagine the South Pole. There's some research that goes on in the South Pole, but usually the scientists leave during the winter because it's very cold. But you can imagine leaving robots there to continue experiments during the winter, and they may be able to even collect new data and find new information that we haven't been able to do until now because humans are not able to be there during that time. You can also imagine having these robots in very remote jungle environments, such as the Amazon jungle or different remote areas of the African continent or Southeast Asia, where it becomes either inhospitable or maybe a scientist doesn't really want to live there permanently. These robots can also help with military operations laboratories, where they can combine enhanced operations and the safe handling and management of potentially dangerous agents. And I also envision that they can be used in space labs. So currently at the International Space Center, there are astronauts that go and they conduct experiments, but they are not there indefinitely because they're human beings and they need to return to Earth. And there are times where the space station is not occupied. So we can imagine that these robots can continue the experiments that the scientists started, or just carry them out without human beings there. So why should we use embodied AI agents in the lab? I make the case that they can reduce risks, especially in high containment labs, but I would say in general. So these agents have protective materials and sensors. They can operate in hazardous environments in ways that we cannot. For example, there's no risk of infection when you're using a robot because they don't breathe. There's a lower risk of contamination. The robots wouldn't leave the laboratory. They don't have a family to go home at night or a pet that they interact with, so they wouldn't potentially contaminate other people or the outside environment because they don't leave the lab. And they perform the task exactly as we say. So in the field of biosafety and biosecurity, there's a concept called human factors, which is that we can have a perfect protocol on how to do something. We can have policies and procedures. You can train people all you want, but people behave in different ways. Sometimes we interpret the protocols differently, or maybe you secretly don't agree with the protocol, and then the moment nobody's looking, we go and do something different because we think we don't like this step, or we don't need it, or maybe today we're running late and I really have to go home, so it's okay if I skip this little step. The robots don't do that. They are robots, they're programmed, they'll do exactly what we say as we say. So for them, the key is to make sure that your protocol is sound, that you have validated your protocol and that it works. Once you do that, it will carry it out over and over again in exactly the same way. Then you have improved efficiency because, as I said, they're trained to do the task exactly. They can also inspect equipment. We can teach them to calibrate equipment, monitor environmental conditions, be consistent and precise. We human beings get fatigued over time. We have different energy. Some people are morning people, some people are night owls. So if you're a morning person, maybe you're very energetic in the morning, you don't forget any steps, but maybe by the end of the Friday afternoon, the end of the week, you're exhausted and you just want to go home. And the robots do not get fatigued like that. They just operate continuously in the same way. Of course, they will need to be recharged and things like that, but they don't get fatigued in the way that humans do. And then again, because we can program the agents to perform standardized procedures, we can ensure that the tasks are carried out in the same way over and over again. They can follow the protocol every time, so it minimizes variability and mistakes. So you may be thinking that robots in the lab are a new idea, but really we have been using robots in the lab for a long time, going back to the early 80s. These are some examples. You may already have some of these robots in your lab. So the first generation of robots are called single task robots. They may be automatic pipetters. Maybe they're programmed to pipette 100 microliters over and over again. You probably use them for multiplex PCR or high volume pipetting. In clinical diagnostic settings, they're used a lot. The second generation robots are sort of the robotic arm type of robots. Again, you may have seen them or you might have some in your lab already. Sometimes these are arranged in a series. So you may have multiples of these arms in a row, and you may be using them to do DNA extraction, RNA extraction, PCR, protein purification. These are sort of the most common uses for these robots in the lab. The third generation are cobots. These robots move around and they can do sort of a little bit more complicated tasks. So this is an example of a cobot from a company that designed them. It's carrying out a tube rack, and it can deliver it from one place to another. Another example of this cobot that's more in a clinical setting, you might have seen it during COVID, the pandemic. They were used for interacting with patients. They usually had a little screen, so you may have had, especially they were deployed with children, and the children could interact with a robot if they were in the hospital and they were not able to see their parents or their siblings, and at least they could interact with something. And the fourth generation, which is where we are now, is the embodied AI agent. This is a sample of the Tesla humanoid robot. And there is a video. This is a still image of that video. It's able to pick up little bottles from this rack. So in order to have an embodied AI agent in the lab that works really well for us, they need to have mobility, dexterity, and cognitive function. So they need to be able to move around in the lab in a complex setting where there's multiple people, multiple things. It may be crowded. They need to be able to identify what is an equipment and not bump into things or get stuck and not move because there's a new obstacle. They need to be able to have human dexterity, our level. They need to be able to have sort of opposable thumbs or equivalent that works so that they can do pipetting and handle very delicate things. Maybe they can handle a mouse. Maybe they can do a tail vein injection for us. So they need to be able to have this function that you don't squish the mouse and kill it, right? You need to be able to do these very delicate operations. I will show you in a few slides that this is already possible with these robots. And they need to have cognitive function. So there's 4 types of interactions or integrations of humans and robots in the lab, or these embodied AI agents. So the first one is coexistence, where the humans and the agents are in the same space, but they remain independent from each other. So they're not doing the same tasks, and they don't have direct interactions, and they don't overlap. The second is, and these are sort of in order of more complexity, is synchronization. So in this case, both the humans and the agents are working on the same workpiece together, but their tasks are not overlapping. So for example, an agent could be holding a sample for you while you do something to the sample. Then we have cooperation, where both the agent and the human are working in the same area, sort of on the same thing, but they're different. They're doing different but complementary tasks to each other. And you may need the robot to do a step so that you can do the next step. And then last is the most difficult, it would be collaboration, where you are integrated with a robot and you're working together, collaborating to carry out a task. And a task that would be complex. A simple example you can think of is you and the robot carry a box together. So just like a human, one person might be walking backwards, or maybe it's the robot. You have to make sure that they don't bump into the wall or into something else. You have to make sure that you're both holding sort of with the same strength. That would be more complicated for the robot. Now, again, you may be thinking this is science fiction. We're not there yet. But hopefully I will convince you with medical examples that we are already there. So in the field of medicine, robotics has been used for a long time, especially in surgery. In fact, you may have had yourself, or maybe know someone, a friend or a family member who's had laparoscopic surgery, and that is a robotic surgery. So in medicine, there's different levels of use of robots, going from zero autonomy, where the surgeon manipulates the robot completely, to what is called level 5, which is full autonomy. The robot carries out everything on their own autonomously. And there's in-between levels. This is an example from Johns Hopkins University just a few months ago. where a robot was able to perform a gallbladder transplant in a pig completely autonomously. So what does that mean? Completely autonomously. Usually, when you do a surgery, the surgeon will plan out the surgery and the steps that involves superficially. I'm not a surgeon. Is they plan out the surgery, they plan out the steps, each and every step that you will carry out in the surgery, and then they also plan out the how they're going to carry out each of the steps. And then finally, you execute the surgery. So more historically, what robots have been helping with is carrying out the surgery, carrying out the steps. Sometimes instead of the surgeon, it's the robot that's carrying out the steps. This is the first example where the robot, which was also an AI, carried out the entire surgery on its own. So it planned the steps, it planned the how, and it carried out the surgery. So you can envision in the future that you can have surgery done by robots. And it may sound scary, but I think it also will bring incredible opportunity to bring healthcare to many countries and places around the world that are not currently accessible. There's many countries where organ transplants is very limited. Certain complicated operations are very limited simply because the resources are not there, that you don't have expert surgeons. And you can imagine now with a robot like this, you can deploy and you can have very complicated open heart surgeries or transplant surgeries in very remote part of the world. So this is the most complicated slide. It's okay. So we're going to have an embodied AI agent in the lab, but we need to program this agent to work in the lab. It's not going to come prepackaged from the factory because it's a very unique type of use for the robot. So before we get there, maybe in the future, they might come pre-programmed from the factory, but not yet. So we need to have information input. So we'll have to define the environment, the lab, the layout of the lab. Where is this robot, or where are these robots going to be? Are they going to be in one specific lab space? Are they going to be in the entire building? Are they going to be able to go up and down floors? Or we're just going to limit them to a specific area? We will have to define that ahead of time. And then you're basically going to have to define the system. You're going to have to feed it. What are the objectives? What do you want the robot to do? Do you want the robot to carry out certain experiments? Do you want the robot to be able to do a spill cleanup? Do you want the robot to monitor other equipment or maybe monitor people? Do you want the robot to do all of it? And then you'll have to basically model, collect data from modeling, and define your system. Once you have a defined system, then you will have to collect more data with simulation and make sure that your system works. And after a lot of reiteration and analysis, you will need a lot of help from computational and AI colleagues. Biologists and biosafety and biosecurity experts will not necessarily have the computing knowledge to be able to carry this out by ourselves. Then eventually you will arrive at a programmed robot that will do what you need it to do. And then after that, you will have to strategize about how many people will be in the space, how many robots will be in the space, buffer sizes in the space, how much space will you need in the hallway, how much space around the benches so that both human and robot can be in the same space. Then you will have to think about predicted outcomes, the design, not just the design of the robot, but the design of the lab space. And what requirements you will need. And you also may need to have storage for the robots, for the parts. And then you have to do or make a business value case to management and upper leadership. Is it worth it to have this robot? What will be the return on investment? As you saw in the video, some of these robots are worth $16,000 for one. So They are expensive, but it's not astronomically expensive. There are some challenges and limitations, of course. One of the main ones is sensory capability. These robots still struggle with sensory, especially sensory complexities, especially some that need to be refined in high containment settings and other lab settings. These robots doing Tai Chi are very cute, but they still need to evolve a little more. There are limitations with real-time decision making for the systems. They need to improve integrating new information and weighing different risk factors to make decisions that align with our protocols. And they currently lack nuanced understanding the way a human being would know. So this needs to be improved because they will need to be able to make judgments in the way that we human beings bring that they don't currently possess, especially in case of an emergency, but also in case of ethical thinking and regulatory considerations during an emergency. We can program the robot to say, prioritize human life over everything, but sometimes the outcome might be unpredictable until we're able to gather a little bit more information. And if we program the robot to say the material is the most important thing, the robot may be able to may sacrifice human life or human well-being over preserving the material. And that's not a desired outcome, right? We don't want to put human beings at risk for the sake of saving a sample in a fire, let's say. And then it still needs to improve its mobility and interaction in order to be able to reach the level that we need in the lab. You guys have been really quiet up until now. Maybe you're just wowed. So normally in scientific talks, we end with conclusions, but I've decided to end with some questions that we should be thinking about as a group. I don't have the answers to these questions, so these are for all of us to ponder on and decide. But as a group, as scientists, we need to think about what are the potential risks and benefits of using these embodied AI agents in the lab. Do we think that they will replace humans eventually, especially in a high containment setting? Do we think that it's worthwhile replacing a human with a robot, especially in a dangerous setting with biological materials? And how might this interaction with the robots affect scientific research in a positively or negatively? It will definitely change the way science is done. It might speed up some discovery. There's, of course, security threats that I haven't really mentioned in this talk because this is more of a concept idea. But there are security threats using these AI agents in the lab. And we need to think about what are those threats and how will we minimize and mitigate them. And what are the major obstacles that you can see to implementing this technology? There may be technical obstacles, there may be practical obstacles, there may be cultural obstacles. So don't just think about technologically wise, but why would someone want or not want the robot? What are some fears that people may have? What are some concerns? Definitely some scientists will think, maybe I'm going to lose my job. I don't want this robot here. So with that, I will be happy to take any questions.